Hello and welcome to the Virtual Jewish Thought of the Week. This is Rabbi Lewin speaking to you from downtown Dallas, Texas. There are commandments in the Torah that involve action. Most of the commandments are this type, which entail refraining from coming into contact with certain things or to actively do something with another person or an object and so forth. Then there are those rare mitzvahs which involve the heart, emotions, to love, or the idea of repentance, for example, which entails a certain feeling of regret and resolve. And this week, in this week's Torah portion, we learn about a commandment that involves remembering, a command to remember. As the Jewish people were coming out of Egypt, inspired by the events and the miracles that they saw, nearing their destiny to enter the land of Israel, they had to encounter many enemies and battles. One of those, perhaps the most famous, was an individual, a leader called Amalek, who saw the success of the Jewish people, and in their most vulnerable state, he met them along the way and attacked them, ambushed them, and cut them down. And this was one of the biggest historical battles that we see in the Bible and in Jewish history. Now, the verse says, for all time, the Jewish people have a special mitzvah to remember what Amalek did to you as you came out of Egypt, how he met you along the way and cut down all the weak, and so forth. The punchline of this command is not only to remember, but the verse ends, do not forget. So it's a double expression, to remember what Amalek did and not to forget. It's interesting that this expression, do not forget, coincides with the commemoration this week of 9/11, where the saying is, never forget. Now, when we hear that expression, to remember, to never forget, what that probably means is that you don't take things for granted, that you use that to fuel and inspire your life, that you call to mind what happened and don't become complacent, whatever that means for every individual. They apply that to their life to motivate them in some way. But when the Torah says specifically to remember and not to forget, and that's a command, we have to ask the question, how do I fulfill that? Are there any specific ways that I have to remember it? Does it mean that I call it to mind once and I'm done? Do I think about it when I'm walking on the street? Do I have to review that passage in the Bible? What does remembering and not forget entail as a command, as a mitzvah for the Jewish people? Now here's where the Hebrew language becomes significant. Jewish tradition explains that the word zachor, in this case, to remember, refers to remembering with one's mouth, with one's lips. So what that entails is some actual speech to read the verse and recall that. Calling it to mind is not good enough. It has to actually manifest in speech. Whereas al tishkach, not to forget, that's sufficient to just not to forget in one's heart or one's mind. So we have a parallel here between two commandments, the command of remembering Amalek, that has to be with speech, and the command to remember the Shabbos, the Sabbath day, that also has to be with speech. How do we know that? Because the word used in Hebrew is zachar. Another parallel is the idea that these two commandments are not simply one-time events, they're ongoing commandments. Anytime we voluntarily come and remember those verses and read them, we are fulfilling a mitzvah from the Torah of remembering Amalek and remembering the Shabbos day. Now, some people may be wondering, what is this event of remembering the enemy of the Jewish people, Amalek, and what he did? How does that pertain to my life today? There are many answers about why this is such a significant event, but we're going to now tackle the deeper application of the command to remember Amalek. The mystical sources explain that the 7 famous nations, the general enemies of the Jewish people that we read about in the Bible and the Torah, have a more universal application in that they are paradigms for 7 major forces, destructive forces internally or forces of evil in the world that can manifest themselves in different ways. What is the more spiritual enemy of Amalek that we read about and encounter in our lives? The answer is hinted at in the verse itself, which describes the manner in which he attacked the Jewish people. It says, Asher karcha b'derech, that Amalek came and he met the Jewish people. But this word karcha, to meet you, also shares a common root with the word to cool off, to make you cold. If read this way, the deeper meaning of the verse would mean that the Jewish people are now traveling, moving from Egypt, inspired, hopeful, at their peak of success, and comes Amalek and he's jealous, he desires to cool them off, to get them when they are most vulnerable in the sense that they are most optimistic and excited, and he comes and cools that down and attacks their inspiration. So simply put, Amalek is the trait of coldness, the counterforce to one's excitement in holiness. Where do we see this in our daily experience? There are some times where somebody is passionate, excited, inspired by an event that happened. For example, you say, "You're not going to believe this. Look at this. It's like a miracle what happened to me." And they tell it to a friend, and someone says, well, something bothers them that this person is inspired, excited. So they want to diminish that. They say, yeah, it happens all the time. Don't get so excited about that. Or what do you think? It's really a miracle? Or let's say someone comes and says, wow, I just heard the most unbelievable speaker. And they say, yeah, he's all right. That trait to, in a way, begrudge or to diminish somebody's passion or excitement is the trait of Amalek. And this is not only something that we may experience externally, even in our own mind, we may hear a voice sometimes where we start to get motivated and we say like, wow, I think I'm going to do an extra mitzvah. I think I'm more excited about this. And you hear a voice that says, don't go to the extreme. Don't get too worked up about it. No, you know, it's not going to last, and sort of cools you off. That trait is the trait of Amalek. If that's the force that's out there threatening us, we have to, number one, be aware of it, not to forget that it exists. That's the idea of remembering on a deeper level. Be conscious that every time we may get in a state of starting to progress or excited or inspired by something, there may be that other individual or that voice inside us that wants to come cool us off, tone it down, and we have to be on guard for that. But the other idea is, how do we combat that? What's the antidote for the force of Amalek? And here's where the parallel with the Shabbos comes in. Just like we have a command to remember Amalek, what's the medicine for that? One of the ways to combat that is our approach to remembering the Shabbos. Now, normally when someone thinks of the Shabbos, they remember the Sabbath day, what comes to mind is all the forbidden activities and the laws of what I'm not allowed to do, or the idea I can't go to the office, or the idea that I need to rest, so I need one day to recuperate or to take a nap. That's all part of the idea of remembering the Shabbos. But really the idea of remembering the Shabbos has to do with using that day to make sure that we keep our inspiration. That time of rest and reflection is not just the idea of taking it easy, but one day a week we have the ability to reflect and to renew our inspiration to counter that force of Amalek that's going to try to take it away. The more we are able to use that day to energize and refuel our priorities, the more we will be able to keep that inspiration throughout the entire week to come. That's the deeper idea of remembering the Shabbos. Thank you for watching, for your time. If you would like to sponsor or dedicate a video, please email me at the address below, and I would love to hear your feedback, comments, or questions. I look forward to speaking with you next week.